The sun bled over the rim of Dry Fork like a wound, smearing the sky with angry reds and golds. The wind was dry and sharp, cutting through the town's main street, lifting dust into mean little spirals that stung the eyes and whispered of bad luck. Wagons clattered over splintered boards, saloon doors creaked, and the sour stink of sweat, gun oil, and horse piss hung thick in the July heat. June Miller stumbled into the middle of the street, clutching her swollen belly, her breath ragged. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, her copper hair clinging to her cheeks in limp tangles. She had walked nearly 6 miles from the edge of the canyon after the midwife turned her away. Not enough silver, the woman had said, shutting the door with a finality that echoed in June's bones. Her boots were gone, lost days ago. The soles of her feet were raw, blistered. Each step felt like stepping on broken glass. But she kept moving, one trembling hand on her belly, the other outstretched as if pleading with the horizon. Voices buzzed around her like flies. Shopkeepers peered out from behind curtains. A ranch hand spat into the dirt. Laughter floated from the saloon where poker chips clinked and some off-key piano tortured an old hymn. No one stepped forward, not even a child. June fell to her knees. Pain tore through her like a branding iron pressed her spine. She screamed, not a dainty cry, but a sound of desperation, animal and raw, ripped from her lungs and flung into the sky. The townsfolk scattered like chickens from a hawk. She fell onto her side, cradling her belly. Blood soaked through the hem of her dress. It was happening. Now. Here. A tall man in a gray vest and cream-colored hat strolled down the wooden sidewalk, a gold pocket watch in hand. Lawrence Blackstone, owner of the largest ranch for 3 counties, oil leases thicker than Bible pages in his safe. His boots gleamed like wet ink, each step too careful to ever touch dirt. He stopped in front of June, looked down as if someone had dropped a dead rabbit in his path. Disgraceful, he said, voice cold as ice chipped from a mountain stream. You got no business here, girl. Go bleed in the hills where you belong. She looked up at him, lips trembling. Please. He kicked her. The toe of his boot drove into her ribs. She gasped a dry sound, her body curling protectively over the life inside her. Pain exploded across her side, and the blood came faster. The crowd didn't move. You're fouling the street, he sneered. Trash belongs in the gutter. From the far end of town came the sound of hooves, steady, measured, purposeful. Sheriff Thomas Gage rode alone, coat flapping behind him like wings. His hat shadowed a scarred face, one jaw tighter than the other from a healed bullet wound. He dismounted slow, eyes locked on Blackstone. Gage didn't speak. He walked past the silent crowd, past the still-swinging saloon doors, past the loafers and fence-sitters who suddenly found their boots very interesting. Blackstone turned to the sound of spurs. Well, look what the tumbleweeds dragged in, he muttered. Sheriff, you planning to join the show or clear the street? Gage stepped between them and stared down the man. The dust clung to his boots, his coat, his badge dulled by wear. His hand hovered near his holster. Touch her again, Gage said, voice low and dry as the desert wind, and I'll put you in the ground. The air thickened. Blackstone narrowed his eyes, nostrils flaring. He was used to owning rooms with his voice, his money, or his fists. This whore's a stain on the town. You going to throw your badge away for someone like her? Gage looked at June, and something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of memory of loss, of nights spent staring at an empty crib. His mouth twisted. I've seen stains, he said. You're one of M. The hammer of his Colt clicked. Blackstone held up both hands, palms open. You really want this to be the day, Sheriff? Gage didn't blink. I really do. Long seconds passed. Blackstone's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, spitting into the dirt. She'll rot just fine without my help, he muttered, then walked away, boots clicking sharp and hollow on the boards. Gage knelt beside June. Her eyes fluttered, her lips pale. The baby was coming fast. Too fast. You with me, ma'am? He asked, voice softer now. She nodded faintly. We can't stay here. You're strong enough to hold on. I think so. He scooped her up with surprising gentleness. Her head dropped against his shoulder as he turned toward the old chapel at the edge of town, abandoned, gutted by fire years ago, but still standing. He carried her through the heat and silence, the crowd parting like grass before a brush fire. Inside, the air was thick with soot and the ghosts of hymns. Sunlight streamed through a shattered window, catching on broken glass and old pews. He laid her down on an old table, grabbed his coat, folded it beneath her head. "I'll need water," he muttered, "and something clean." June grabbed his wrist, her fingers weak, but insistent. "No time." Then the next wave hit, and she screamed again. Her body arched, sweat poured from her brow. Gage took off his hat, rolled up his sleeves. "I've done a lot of things," he muttered, "but I never birthed a child." "Then it's time to learn," she gasped. Outside, a dog barked. A bell rang in the distance. Time stilled. The birth was chaos. Wet, bloody, primal. Gage barked orders to no one. June screamed until her throat was raw. Pain bent her like steel in a forge. And then, with a final push and a guttural cry, it was done. A baby's wail cut through the air, shrill, angry, alive. Gage stared at the little bundle, still slick with blood, lungs shrieking against the injustice of being born in such a world. "It's a girl," he whispered. June sobbed, tears streaking down her cheeks as he placed the child in her arms. The baby blinked, calmed by the sound of her mother's heartbeat. "She's so small," June murmured. Gage leaned against the wall, sweat pouring down his face. "You both are," he said, half smiling. "But I reckon small don't mean weak." The silence that followed was filled only by the gentle sounds of breathing. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, painting them in gold and crimson. "You got a name?" Gage asked quietly. June looked down at her daughter. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." He nodded slowly. "Fitting." For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside felt distant, like a dream half remembered. Gage studied the two of them. The girl clinging to life, the woman who had walked barefoot across the desert to bring her into the world. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in years, the tightness in his chest loosened. Something shifted. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. June shook her head, eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "Then stay in the chapel tonight. I'll postcard." She looked up at him, unsure, wary. "Why are you helping me?" He thought about it for a long moment. Thought of his wife, dead from fever. The child they never had. The aching years. "Because someone should have," he said, and he walked outside, back into the sun, hand on his revolver, eyes on the road, waiting for the trouble he knew would come. Night settled over Dry Fork like a heavy shroud, the chapel cloaked in silence and shadow. Inside, June lay curled on the scorched floorboards, her baby pressed to her chest beneath a threadbare blanket Gage had found in the abandoned sacristy. The infant's breathing was soft, irregular, as though even sleep was a struggle. Every now and then, Hope whimpered, and June would hum, voice raw but gentle. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. Every breath burned her ribs where Blackstone's boot had landed. She was cold and feverish all at once, her mind drifting between exhaustion and fierce alertness. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, but her eyes remained open in the dark. Outside, Gage sat against the chapel door with his rifle across his lap. The firelight from a nearby oil lantern flickered over his face, half in shadow, half in gold. His eyes scanned the street. His fingers tapped the wood of the rifle like a metronome, steady and patient. He'd stood watch over many things in his life, convicts, bandits, buried secrets, but never a woman and a newborn child. June watched his silhouette, noting the stillness. He didn't fidget or slump. He sat as if carved from stone, unmoving except for that rhythmic tapping. She wondered what it must feel like to be a man with the power to make the world pause just by standing his ground. He hadn't asked for thanks. He hadn't asked for her story. But she needed to speak. Maybe to him. Maybe to herself. "My husband's name was Henry," she said softly, unsure if he could hear her through the thick air. "Henry Miller. He made guns for a living, not the kind you hang on a wall, but working ones, no frills. He said they should be ugly, so people wouldn't fall in love with M. There was a pause. Gage didn't move. Shot dead over a poker hand. Just like that. He had 2 sevens. The other man had a temper. She adjusted the baby slightly. Hope let out a tiny squeak and went quiet again. They buried him with no stone. Couldn't afford it. I used to sit by a rock I thought was his grave, talk to it. I think that's when the town started looking at me different. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched. I was 21. Thought I'd die of it, but I didn't. Still nothing. Then, after a beat, Gage's voice came. Quiet, steady. I lost someone too. June blinked in the dark. My wife. Her name was Miriam. She was a teacher out of Carson City. We tried for 6 years to have a child. Never happened. Doc said the fault was mine. He shifted, the scrape of his coat against the door loud in the quiet. Then the fever took her. Town was overrun, no one left to help. She died with my hand in hers. Told me not to blame myself. A dry laugh. I did anyway. June swallowed the lump rising in her throat. I'm sorry, she whispered. No need, just how the world works. Takes what it pleases and leaves you wondering why. The baby stirred again. June brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead, her fingers trembling. They think I'm trash, she said. The folks here. They always did. After Henry died, I cleaned floors at the saloon for a few weeks. Then some of the men started offering me money to stay after hours. I never said yes. But that was enough. Rumor does more damage than truth ever could. She expected silence, but Gage spoke again, voice lower now. You think I care what people whisper behind their doors? June shook her head slowly. No, I think you're the only man in this place who still knows what mercy looks like. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The wind howled against the chapel walls, dust tapping the stained glass like fingers trying to get in. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked and was answered by another. Eventually, Gage rose. His boots echoed softly as he approached her and crouched nearby. In his hand was a canteen. You need water, he said. June took it gratefully and drank. It tasted like metal and dust but soothed her throat. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed. You got plans, he asked. She laughed, bitter and dry. Does surviving count as a plan? Sometimes it's the only one that matters. She looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. Hope's fingers twitched in some quiet dream, her lips forming soft ovals. I want her to grow up someplace she don't have to flinch when a man raises his voice. Or wonder why folks hate her without knowing her name. Gage nodded. That's a tall order around here. I know. He stood again. I'll be back before dawn. Try and sleep. Where are you going? Home. Gonna bring you something better than that blanket and floorboard. Before she could argue, he disappeared through the chapel door, swallowed by night. June listened to the receding echo of his steps, her heart strangely heavy. He returned an hour later, carrying a bundle of supplies, blankets, bread, boiled eggs, a small jar of whiskey for the pain. He laid everything down without a word, then disappeared outside again to resume his watch. The next morning, June walked out into the light, with the baby swaddled against her chest. The town greeted her with silence. Some turned their eyes, others stared openly. None offered a word. She walked anyway, straight-backed, chin high, toward the sheriff's office where Gage was cleaning his rifle on the porch. He stood when he saw her. I can't stay in that chapel forever, she said simply. No, you can't. She hesitated. Do you know anyone hiring? Gage studied her for a moment. Not much work in town worth your pride. Not honest work, anyway. I'll take the risk. He set the rifle down. You know how to shoot? She raised an eyebrow. I was married to a gunsmith. He nodded once. Come back tomorrow. I'll teach you. And she did. Each morning, before the sun hit the church steeple, June met him behind the jailhouse. He handed her an old revolver, Henry's, the same one he'd found wrapped in her pack when she arrived. The pearl grip was worn, the barrel etched with tiny swirls, more memory than machine. At first, she flinched every time it fired. Her wrists ached. Her aim was wild, but day after day she returned. She listened. She learned, and she got better. By the 7th day, she hit every bottle he lined on the fence. On the 8th, she drew faster than he expected and caught a rattlesnake slithering too close to the steps. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She aimed and fired, one shot through the skull. Gage looked at her, mildly impressed. "Guess that settles it." She grinned through the dust. "Guess it does." That night, she held hope beneath the stars. The baby was stronger now, her cries louder, her limbs more active. June rocked her gently, her back resting against a weathered fence post, the sky above her endless and clean. Gage joined her, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. "What happens now?" she asked. He sipped the coffee, eyes scanning the horizon. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For Blackstone to make his next move." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "You think he's not done?" "I know he's not. But you still helped me." He looked at her, and something old and tired softened in his face. "Because I've been a man who looked away. Never again." She said nothing, but she reached out, and for a moment her fingers rested on his. Then she stood, baby in her arms, and walked toward the chapel, the fading light casting long shadows behind her. Gage stayed behind, watching the dust swirl in her wake. There was a storm coming. He could feel it, not just in the ache of his bad knee or the stillness of the night, but in the way the town held its breath, waiting, and he would be ready. The wind came down from mountains mean and fast, whipping through Dry Fork with the sting of grit and vengeance. It howled between buildings and slammed shutters closed like a warning. The town felt taut, like an old rope pulled too tight. People kept indoors longer. Conversations died mid-sentence when footsteps echoed down the street. No one said his name aloud, but they all knew it, Blackstone. He hadn't forgotten the humiliation in the street, and men like him didn't let things go, quietly. Gage stood in the jailhouse doorway with his arms crossed, watching the sky churn above the rooftops. The scent of rain hovered, but the clouds gave nothing. Behind him, June swept the floor. Hope, sleeping in a makeshift cradle made from an old whiskey crate and lined with soft flannel Gage, had bartered from the widow, Tansley. The baby was growing, fussing louder, drinking more, gripping June's finger like she already knew the world wasn't safe. June's hand paused mid-sweep. "How long are you going to watch the road, like it's going to rear up and bite?" Gage didn't look back. "Until it does." She leaned the broom against the wall and came to stand beside him. "I can't live like this. Waiting. Watching. I already did that once, waiting on Henry to come home from the saloon with all his teeth." Gage glanced at her. "This ain't the same." "No," she asked, "because from where I'm standing, all I see is the same silence before something breaks." Gage didn't respond. His jaw worked slightly, the muscle ticking beneath skin weathered by sun and regret. He'd been a man who thrived in standoffs, who wore tension like a second badge. But this was different. June wasn't a bystander. She wasn't a witness. She was in the heart of it now, and if Blackstone came, and it wouldn't just be a message, it would be a reckoning. That night, they heard the first sign. A crash outside the chapel. Glass shattering. Then a scream. High and short, like it had been smothered halfway through. Gage grabbed his rifle, June already reaching for Henry's revolver. She held it with both hands, her arms steady, her fingers sure. By the time they reached the chapel, flames were licking up the sidewall. Someone had thrown a lantern through the window. The baby's cradle, thank God empty, was overturned inside. A bottle lay shattered near the altar, the scent of kerosene thick in the air. June didn't hesitate. She wrapped her shawl around her mouth and dashed into the building. Gage cursed and followed. Inside, smoke coiled like snakes around the rafters. June grabbed what she could. Diapers, a tin of milk, the Bible her husband had once carved their initials into. Gage stamped out the fire with his coat, the hem catching and blackening. By the time they got out, coughing and soaked with sweat, the side of the chapel was scorched but standing. Barely. June sat on the ground, holding the Bible to her chest. "He's sending a message," she said hoarsely. Gage didn't answer. He was looking at the shadows beyond the trees. Someone had watched, someone had made sure they saw the blaze, and someone had run off before they could catch a face. 2 nights later, the mayor summoned Gage to his office. June insisted on coming too. Mayor Hayward sat behind his wide oak desk, thick hands folded, mouth tight with displeasure. He was the kind of man who measured his words in dollars. His office was lined with ledgers and contracts, and behind him hung a portrait of a president who hadn't been in office for 10 years. "Sheriff," he began, "I understand there's been some incidents. Arson. Threats." Gage replied coolly. "You can call it what it is." Hayward leaned back. "Blackstone's a generous man. Keeps this town from falling into the dust. Donates to the church. Pays the saloon license fees." June stepped forward. "He also kicked a pregnant woman in the street and tried to burn her out with her baby inside." Hayward barely looked at her. "That's your word, ma'am. I've got the burn marks and bullet holes to go with it if you need proof." Gage's voice cut through. "Mayor, let me be clear. If you expect me to sit on my hands and smile while Blackstone tries to kill a woman under my protection, I'll be turning in this badge today." The room went still. Hayward's face flushed, then paled. "You're making this personal." "It is personal," Gage said. "To me and to the law. You let Blackstone keep pushing, this town won't need a sheriff, it'll need a grave digger." He turned and June followed. As they stepped outside, a passing ranch hand spit in the dirt near their boots. June met his glare head-on, and for the first time, the man looked away first. Back at the jailhouse, Gage began reinforcing the windows, barricading the front with sandbags taken from the freight depot. June practiced reloading, faster and smoother. Every night, she slept with hope in one arm and the revolver within reach. But tension has a way of wearing people down. One afternoon, Gage found her sitting behind the building, crying silently, her shoulders shaking, the gun across her lap. He approached quietly, crouched beside her. "I can't do this forever," she said, "always looking over my shoulder, wondering if today's the day I lose everything all over again." He didn't speak right away, just placed a hand over hers. "You're not alone," he said. She looked at him through wet lashes. "I'm not your problem." "You're not a problem," he corrected. "You're a choice, and I made mine." The words settled like stones in her chest, heavy but grounding. That night, the attack came. 2 riders thundered down the street, rifles raised. They didn't shout warnings, didn't give demands, just opened fire. Glass shattered. A bullet tore through the side wall of the jailhouse. Gage yanked June and Hope behind the desk, returning fire through the broken window. June, without hesitation, rolled to the side, found an angle and fired twice. One rider fell, his horse bolting in panic. The second wheeled around, heading for the hills. June stepped outside, took aim, and fired a final shot. Dust exploded near the rider's feet, and he disappeared into the night, trailing blood. When the quiet returned, it was full of breathless awe. Hope wailed. June sank to her knees, tears running down her face, not from fear, but from the raw release of surviving. Gage stepped beside her and gently lifted the revolver from her hand. "You held your ground," he said. "Most men I know wouldn't have." June looked up at him, lips trembling. "I don't want to be brave every damn day." He crouched, touched her cheek. "I know, but you are." She laughed through the tears, a tired, broken sound. In the days that followed, the town began to shift. Slowly, quietly. People looked longer. Some nodded. A few offered bread or cloth, not charity, but respect. The saloon owner sent over milk. The barber offered to stand watch while Gage slept. Not everyone, but enough. June still kept the revolver nearby, still watched every face twice. But she stood taller, spoke louder, laughed more often. One evening, Gage found her standing on the jailhouse porch with Hope in her arms, watching the sun dip behind the hills. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "but trouble's the same wherever you go. Might as well fight it where you've got a reason." She looked at him, long and steady. "I think I'm starting to understand that." He smiled. "We ain't done yet." "No," she agreed, "but we're not broken either." And as night fell again, with the air thick with heat and stories yet to be written, they stood side by side, two survivors in a town finally starting to remember its soul. The day came heavy with stillness, like the land itself had gone quiet, bracing for something no one wanted name. The sky was bone-white and cruel, sun hung low but sharp, casting shadows like blades. Dry Fork breathed differently that morning. Shop doors stayed closed longer. Boots struck boardwalks with less conviction. Even the wind, usually restless, stalled, holding its breath with everyone else. Gage felt it first in his bones, the way old soldiers and broken men often did. A wrongness in the air, the way the birds didn't sing and the horses wouldn't settle. He cleaned his rifle for the third time, fingers moving without thought, eyes on the distant hills. June stood in the doorway of the jailhouse, hope wrapped to her chest. The baby was quiet now, eyes wide, alert, as if she too could sense what the grown-ups were too afraid to say. June had barely slept. Her nerves were wound tight, but her hands were steady. Henry's revolver sat snug against her hip. She'd oiled it just before dawn, humming lullabies between each click of the chamber. "He's coming," Gage said simply. June didn't ask how he knew. She only nodded. At noon, the sound came, first like thunder, then like war. Hooves, dozens of them, kicking up dust like a storm crawling toward town. Gage stepped out into the street, eyes narrowed against the light. June stayed back, just inside the door, though her hand rested on her gun. Blackstone rode at the front, black hat low, coat flaring behind him like the wings of a carrion bird. His men flanked him, rifles slung, pistols visible. At least 20. Enough to make a statement. Enough to bury a town if they wanted to. They stopped just short of the sheriff's office. Gage didn't move. Blackstone dismounted slow, adjusting his gloves with calculated calm. He strolled forward, like he owned the dirt beneath his boots, the air around his head. "Afternoon, Sheriff," he said, voice honeyed with contempt. "I believe you've been babysitting something that belongs to me." Gage didn't blink. "You've mistaken a woman and a child for cattle." Blackstone smiled. "You keep hiding behind that badge, but we both know law doesn't mean much out here unless men agree to believe in it." Gage's tone stayed level. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded them why it should." A pause. Blackstone stepped closer. "She lied to you, Sheriff. That baby's mine." June laughed from the doorway. Sharp bitter. "You drunken bastard. You never laid a hand on me, and if you had, I'd have buried you in the canyon before letting that seed take root." Blackstone's eyes flicked to her, narrowing. "You forget your place, girl." "I haven't had a place since the day my husband died," she said coldly. "And I sure as hell don't answer to the likes of you." Gage's hand hovered near his holster. "You've made your threat. Ride back now, and you get to live with your pride intact." Blackstone shook his head slowly. "I've got too many eyes on me to back down now. If I leave, I look weak. And weakness, as you know, is contagious." Gage stepped forward. "Then you've already lost." For a second, everything stopped. Even the horses seemed to freeze, muscles coiled, eyes wild. Blackstone reached for his gun. He was fast, faster than most men twice his size had any right to be. But Gage had spent a lifetime preparing for moments just like this. His gun cleared leather with a hiss. The crack of the shot echoed like thunder. Blackstone staggered backward, clutching his side, blood blooming against his vest. He didn't fall. Not yet. Then all hell broke loose. Guns roared. Bullets flew like wasps. Gage ducked behind the watering trough, returning fire in bursts, every shot deliberate. June crouched low inside the door, hope cradled to her chest with one arm, her revolver steady in the other. A man charged the entrance. She shot in the thigh, then again in the chest as he screamed. Townfolk scattered. Some watched from behind shutters. Others ran for cover. The street became smoke and screaming and heat. Gage moved like a ghost, slipping from cover to cover, cutting down attackers with precision. He took a bullet to the arm, kept going, took another grazing his side, gritted his teeth, and advanced. June stepped outside. Hope shielded beneath her coat, her free hand raised. "Enough," she shouted, voice fierce. You're dying for a man who wouldn't remember your names if you fell at his feet. The shooters faltered. One threw down his weapon and fled. Another hesitated, only to be shot in the back by his own man. Blackstone, blood soaking through his fine clothes, staggered toward the jailhouse, gun still in hand. "You think this ends with me?" he snarled. "You think this town won't go back to rot the moment I'm gone?" June walked toward him, eyes locked. "I think you're wrong." He raised his gun. She didn't flinch. A single shot rang out. Blackstone's eyes went wide. He stumbled once, then fell. June lowered the revolver, smoke curling from the barrel. The silence after was deafening. Gage stood breathing hard, blood dripping from his sleeve, watching the last of the men scatter. The street was littered with the wounded, the dead, the dust of violence still hanging in the air. June knelt beside Gage. "You with me?" He nodded slowly. "For as long as you'll have me." They buried the dead outside town. No speeches, no prayers, just dirt and stone. The mayor resigned quietly 2 days later. Rumors said he rode north and never looked back. The townspeople didn't protest. Repairs began slowly. The chapel was rebuilt with wood donated by shopkeepers who once wouldn't spare her a glance. A new sign was nailed to its door, "Hope's Rest." Gage healed slow. June took over the sheriff's paperwork while he mended. Hope grew louder, stronger, bolder. One morning, as the sun cracked over the horizon and spilled gold across the rooftops, Gage stood in front of June on the chapel steps, a small velvet pouch in his hand. "I didn't plan this," he said, voice thick. "You never do," she replied, smiling. He opened the pouch and produced a ring, simple, uncut, fashioned from the melted remains of a bullet casing. "It ain't gold," he said, "but it's ours." She took it, hands trembling. "Yes," she whispered. The wedding was small, just a handful of people and the wide open sky. Gage wore his best shirt. June wore the same dress she'd nearly died in. Hope fussed during the vows, and the preacher chuckled and kept going. Afterward, they stood together, watching the horizon. "This town has a lot of ghosts," June said, quietly. "Let 'em watch," Gage answered. They kissed with dust in their hair and scars on their skin. As the sun dipped low and painted the land in blood and flame, a voice echoed in the wind. Not theirs, not from the past, but something timeless. So when you ride through Dry Fork, if you listen close, you might hear it too. A tale of a woman who bled in the street, a man who refused to look away, and a child born in fire. A tale not about heroes, but survivors, and a place where, against all odds, something wild and true took root and stayed.